My name is Sarah Martinez, and last Christmas Eve, my father looked me straight in the eye across our family dinner table and called me the biggest disappointment of his life. What he didn't know was that I had just closed the biggest deal of my career. 6 months later, I walked into Romano's Italian Bistro, his favorite restaurant for the past 20 years, handed the new ownership papers to the manager, and personally banned him from ever setting foot inside again. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up in Phoenix, Arizona, our family looked like the picture of middle-class success from the outside. My father, Robert Martinez, owned a small but profitable auto repair shop that had been serving the same neighborhood for over 2 decades. My mother, Linda, worked as a school secretary and somehow managed to keep our household running like clockwork, despite my father's unpredictable moods and impossible standards. We lived in a modest, ranch-style home in a quiet subdivision where every lawn was perfectly manicured, and every driveway held reliable sedans that never quite screamed wealth but whispered stability. Robert Martinez wasn't just a father in our house. He was the self-appointed judge and jury of everyone's worth, especially mine. Standing at 5'10" with calloused hands that always smelled of motor oil and disappointment, he had this way of looking at you that made you feel like you were already failing before you even opened your mouth. His favorite phrase, which I heard more times than I care to count, was, "Martinez women don't quit, they figure it out." The irony wasn't lost on me that he seemed to think I was constantly on the verge of quitting everything, even when I was working harder than anyone else in the room. My mother, Linda, was what my college business professor would later describe as a classic enabler, though she would have been horrified by that label. She moved through our house like a diplomat in a war zone, always smoothing over conflicts, always making excuses, always trying to keep the peace. When my father would explode over something trivial like the wrong brand of coffee or a slightly higher electric bill, she'd spend the next hour explaining his stress levels and reminding me that running a business was harder than I could understand. Her thin frame and nervous laugh became the soundtrack to my childhood, along with the constant sound of her footsteps as she tried to stay one step ahead of his criticism. Then there was my older brother, Marcus, who somehow managed to do everything wrong and still be the golden child. 3 years older than me, Marcus had stumbled through high school with barely passing grades, dropped out of community college twice, and by the time I was finishing my business degree, he was living in our parents' basement working part-time at a pizza place. But Marcus had one thing I apparently lacked in my father's eyes. He was a man. When Marcus forgot to show up for family dinner, it was because he was probably working hard or spending time with friends. When I was 5 minutes late because of traffic, I was disrespectful and didn't value family time. The double standard became crystal clear when I was 16 and working my first job at a local coffee shop. I had saved up enough money to buy my own car, a used Honda Civic that I was incredibly proud of because I had earned every penny myself. When I brought it home, my father's first comment wasn't congratulations or pride. It was criticism about the color, the mileage, and the fact that I hadn't consulted him before making such a major purchase. Meanwhile, when Marcus crashed his car for the second time that year, my father simply sighed and co-signed for a newer model, explaining that boys need reliable transportation for work. High school became my proving ground in ways I never expected. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. I threw myself into academics, student government, and part-time work with the desperate hope that achievement might finally earn me the respect I craved. I graduated valedictorian with a 4.0 GPA, served as student body president, and had already been accepted to Arizona State University's business program with a partial scholarship. The night of graduation, while other families celebrated at fancy restaurants, my father spent dinner critiquing my speech and pointing out that Marcus had been more popular in school, as if social connections were somehow more valuable than academic achievement. College was my first taste of freedom, and I seized it with both hands. Away from the constant scrutiny and impossible standards, I discovered that I actually had good instincts and natural leadership abilities. I changed my major to entrepreneurial studies, joined the Business Honor Society, and started networking with professors and successful alumni. Dr. Patricia Williams, my small business management professor, became an unexpected mentor who saw potential in me that my own father seemed incapable of recognizing. During my sophomore year, I started a small business providing social media management for local restaurants and retail stores. It began as a class project but quickly grew into something real when I started seeing actual results for my clients. By my junior year, I was making enough money to cover my living expenses and had a waiting list of potential clients. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely proud of something I had built entirely on my own. When I called home to share the news about my growing business, my father's response was predictably deflating. "That's nice, Sarah, but when are you going to focus on getting a real job? Playing around on computers isn't a career." He completely dismissed months of hard work and genuine success because it didn't fit his narrow definition of legitimate employment. My mother, as usual, tried to mediate by suggesting that it was wonderful I was learning about business, even if it was just a hobby for now. The summer before my senior year, I made the mistake of bringing my boyfriend David home to meet my family. David was everything my father should have appreciated in theory. He was studying mechanical engineering, came from a stable family, treated me with respect, and had genuine career prospects. But during that weekend visit, I watched my father systematically tear him down, with subtle insults and condescending questions about his future plans. By Sunday morning, David was making excuses to leave early, and I knew I wouldn't be bringing anyone else home anytime soon. My senior year was a whirlwind of job interviews, final projects, and growing my business to the point where I was seriously considering turning it into a full-time venture after graduation. I had been offered positions at 3 different marketing firms in Phoenix and 1 in Los Angeles that came with a salary that would have shocked my parents. But the opportunity that really excited me was the chance to expand my social media consultancy into a full-service digital marketing agency. The decision between traditional employment and entrepreneurship kept me awake for weeks. Dr. Williams encouraged me to take the leap, pointing out that I already had a proven track record and a solid client base. My business mentor, Elena Rodriguez, who had built her own successful consulting firm, offered to help me develop a proper business plan and even discuss the possibility of partnership opportunities down the road. For the first time, I had a support system of people who believed in my abilities and saw my potential. When I finally made the decision to start my own agency, instead of taking one of the job offers, I knew my family's reaction would be mixed at best. I had saved up enough money to cover my expenses for the first 6 months, had already secured 3 major clients, and had a detailed business plan that projected profitability within the first year. I felt confident and excited about my future in a way I had never experienced before. The conversation with my parents happened over dinner at Romano's Italian Bistro, ironically enough. It was my father's favorite restaurant, a family-owned place where he had been eating since before I was born. The owner, Giuseppe Romano, always greeted him by name and knew his usual order by heart. My father loved the attention and the sense of being a valued regular customer. It was one of the few places where he seemed genuinely relaxed and happy. I had chosen the restaurant specifically because I hoped the familiar, comfortable environment might make him more receptive to my news. I waited until after we had ordered and the conversation had settled into a comfortable rhythm before I brought up my post-graduation plans. I explained my business, showed them the contracts I had already signed, and outlined my financial projections for the first year. My mother listened with what seemed like genuine interest, asking questions about my clients and how I had learned to manage social media accounts so effectively. But my father's expression grew darker as I talked, and I could see the familiar signs of his disapproval building like storm clouds. When I finished my presentation, he set down his fork and looked at me with the expression I had learned to dread throughout my childhood. "Sarah, this is exactly what I've been worried about. You're about to throw away 4 years of expensive education to play around with computers and pretend it's a real business. Do you have any idea how many of these internet startups fail in the first year? You're setting yourself up for failure, and then you'll come running back to us expecting us to pick up the pieces." His words stung, but they weren't unexpected. What caught me off guard was the intensity of his disappointment, as if my decision was a personal attack on everything he had tried to teach me. He spent the next 20 minutes listing every reason why my business would fail, why I wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship, and why I should take one of the traditional job offers instead. My mother tried to play peacekeeper, suggesting that maybe I could try the business part-time while working a regular job, but even her compromise felt like a vote of no confidence. By the end of dinner, I felt smaller and more uncertain than I had in months. The excitement and confidence I had built up over my senior year had been systematically dismantled in the span of one meal. But something had changed in me during college. Instead of accepting his judgment and abandoning my plans, I felt a spark of defiance that I had never experienced before. Maybe it was the success I had already achieved, or maybe it was the confidence that came from having mentors who actually believed in me. But for the first time in my life, I decided to trust my own instincts over his opinion. I graduated summa cum laude 3 weeks later and officially launched Martinez Digital Marketing Agency the following Monday. The first 6 months were exactly as challenging as I had expected, but not in the ways my father had predicted. The technical and creative aspects of the business came naturally to me, and my client base grew steadily through referrals and word-of-mouth recommendations. The real challenges were the administrative details, the constant pressure of being responsible for every aspect of the business, and the isolation that came from working alone in my small apartment. There were definitely moments during those early months when I questioned my decision. When a major client canceled their contract unexpectedly, or when I realized I had made a mistake in my tax calculations, or when I spent 14-hour days trying to meet impossible deadlines, I could hear my father's voice in my head predicting exactly these kinds of problems. But instead of proving him right, each challenge became an opportunity to prove to myself that I was capable of handling whatever came my way. By the end of my first year, Martinez Digital Marketing Agency had exceeded every projection in my original business plan. I had 12 regular clients, had hired 2 part-time contractors to help with the workload, and was already looking into office space because my apartment had become too small for the operation. The financial success was gratifying, but what really mattered to me was the sense of accomplishment that came from building something meaningful entirely on my own terms. The growth continued into my second year, and I began to attract attention from larger companies who wanted to work with an agency that specialized in authentic, relationship-based marketing rather than generic corporate campaigns. My reputation for delivering results and understanding the local market led to partnerships with several major clients, including 2 restaurant chains and a regional retail company. It was during this period of rapid growth that I first seriously considered expanding beyond digital marketing into restaurant consulting. Several of my clients in the food service industry had asked for help with broader operational challenges, from staff training to customer experience optimization. I realized that my combination of marketing expertise and business management skills made me uniquely qualified to help restaurants improve their overall performance, not just their online presence. The idea of working more closely with restaurants appealed to me for reasons that went beyond business strategy. There was something deeply satisfying about helping family-owned establishments thrive in an increasingly competitive market. These were often multi-generational businesses, where the owners had poured their hearts and souls into creating something meaningful for their communities. Helping them succeed felt like contributing to something larger than just profit margins and growth targets. This was the mindset I was in when Christmas Eve arrived during my second year in business. I had spent the previous month closing the biggest deal of my career, a comprehensive marketing and operational consulting contract with a regional restaurant group that would essentially double my company's revenue overnight. The contract represented everything I had worked toward: validation that my business model was not only sustainable, but genuinely valuable to my clients. I was excited to share this achievement with my family, particularly because it directly contradicted every prediction my father had made about my inevitable failure. For once, I had concrete evidence that his judgment had been wrong, and I hoped that maybe this success would finally earn me the respect and acknowledgement I had craved my entire life. The Christmas Eve dinner was held at my parents' house, with the usual cast of characters gathered around the dining room table that had been the site of so many uncomfortable conversations throughout my childhood. Marcus was there with his latest girlfriend, still living in the basement and working the same part-time job he had held for the past 3 years. My mother had outdone herself with the cooking, as she always did for holidays, creating a feast that would have impressed any restaurant. The conversation flowed easily at first, covering safe topics like the weather, holiday plans, and updates on extended family members. I waited for the right moment to share my news, wanting to choose a time when everyone was relaxed and receptive. When my mother asked about how business was going, I took a deep breath and began to describe the contract I had just signed. I explained how the restaurant group had approached me after seeing the results I had achieved for some of their competitors. I detailed the scope of the project, which included everything from social media strategy to staff training programs to customer experience optimization. I mentioned the financial terms, which were significant enough to establish my agency as a major player in the local market. As I talked, I could see my mother's face lighting up with genuine pride and excitement. Marcus even seemed impressed, asking questions about how I had landed such a big client and what the work would involve. For a few minutes, it felt like the kind of family conversation I had always wanted, where my achievements were celebrated and valued. Then my father set down his fork and fixed me with that familiar look of disappointment that had haunted my childhood. The room fell silent as everyone waited to hear his response to what should have been unambiguously good news. When he finally spoke, his words cut through the holiday warmth like a knife through paper. "Sarah, you're 24 years old, and you're still playing make-believe with your little computer business. When are you going to grow up and get a real job? This restaurant consulting nonsense is just you trying to sound more important than you actually are. You're the biggest disappointment of my life, and frankly, I'm embarrassed to tell people what you do for work." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother looked stricken. Marcus stared at his plate, and I felt something break inside me that had been cracking for years. This wasn't the usual dismissal or casual criticism. This was a deliberate, calculated attack designed to destroy any confidence or pride I might have felt about my achievements. What hurt most wasn't just the words themselves, but the timing and the setting. He had waited until I shared my biggest professional success, surrounded by family during what should have been a celebration, to deliver the most devastating judgment possible. It felt like he had been saving up this particular cruelty for maximum impact. I excused myself from the table and walked outside into the cool December evening, trying to process what had just happened. Standing in my parents' driveway, looking at the house where I had spent my childhood desperately trying to earn approval that would never come, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and disappointment were still there, but underneath them was a growing sense of clarity and determination. For the first time, I truly understood that my father's opinion of my worth had nothing to do with my actual achievements or potential. His need to diminish me was about his own insecurities and limitations, not about any failure on my part. The validation I had been seeking from him for 24 years was never going to come, because he was fundamentally incapable of seeing me as anything other than a disappointment. That realization was both devastating and liberating. It meant accepting that I would never have the father I had always wanted, but it also meant that I was finally free to stop trying to earn something that was never going to be offered. I could build my life and my business based on my own values and goals, rather than constantly trying to prove myself to someone who was determined to see me as a failure. As I stood there in the driveway, I made two decisions that would change the trajectory of my life. First, I was going to expand my business into restaurant consulting and management, because I was genuinely passionate about that work and had already proven I was good at it. Second, I was going to stop seeking my father's approval and start building the kind of success that would speak for itself, regardless of his opinion. I walked back into the house, said polite goodbyes to everyone, and drove home feeling strangely calm despite the emotional devastation of the evening. The next morning, I started researching restaurant acquisitions and partnerships, because I had realized that owning restaurants would give me the ultimate platform to prove my capabilities in the industry I was growing to love. That Christmas Eve dinner became the catalyst for everything that followed. Instead of destroying my confidence, my father's cruelty had finally freed me from the impossible task of trying to please him. I was about to discover just how much I was capable of achieving when I stopped caring about his approval and started focusing entirely on my own vision of success. The weeks following that Christmas Eve disaster became a period of intense self-reflection and strategic planning that would reshape everything I thought I knew about myself and my capabilities. I threw myself into research with the kind of focused determination that had gotten me through college, but this time the stakes felt infinitely higher. This wasn't about grades or graduation anymore. This was about proving to myself that I could build something so substantial and successful that external validation would become irrelevant. I started by immersing myself in everything I could learn about restaurant ownership and management. I read industry publications, studied successful restaurant chains, and analyzed the financial models of both thriving and failing establishments. The more I learned, the more fascinated I became with the complexity of the restaurant business. It wasn't just about good food or attractive decor. Successful restaurants required an intricate understanding of supply chain management, staff psychology, customer behavior, marketing strategy, financial planning, and operational efficiency. My existing clients in the food service industry became invaluable sources of inside information. During our regular consulting sessions, I started asking more detailed questions about their challenges beyond marketing. Maria Santos, who owned 3 successful Mexican restaurants in different parts of Phoenix, became particularly generous with her insights. She had started with a single food truck 15 years earlier and built her business through careful expansion and relentless attention to detail. Maria noticed my increased interest in operational aspects of restaurant management and started inviting me to observe her daily routines. I would arrive at her flagship location at 5 in the morning to watch the prep cooks begin their day, then stay through the lunch rush to see how her systems held up under pressure. I learned about inventory management, staff scheduling, vendor relationships, and the hundreds of small decisions that determined whether a restaurant would be profitable or struggle to survive. The education I received from Maria was worth more than any business school course I could have taken. She showed me how to read a profit and loss statement for a restaurant, how to calculate food costs and labor percentages, and how to identify the warning signs that indicated a location might be heading for trouble. More importantly, she helped me understand the emotional and psychological aspects of restaurant ownership that never appeared in textbooks or industry publications. Restaurant owners, Maria explained, needed to be part psychologist, part accountant, part entertainer, and part drill sergeant. They had to motivate staff who were often working for minimum wage in high-stress conditions, satisfy customers who could destroy a reputation with a single negative review, manage suppliers who held enormous power over daily operations, and somehow maintain their own sanity and financial stability through all of it. As my understanding of the restaurant industry deepened, I began to see opportunities that my marketing background had prepared me to recognize. Many restaurant owners were incredibly talented at creating great food and memorable dining experiences, but they struggled with the business management aspects that determined long-term success. They needed someone who could bridge the gap between creative vision and financial reality, someone who understood both the artistic and analytical sides of restaurant operation. This realization led me to develop what I started calling comprehensive restaurant consulting, which went far beyond the social media management and basic marketing services I had been providing. I created detailed assessments that examined every aspect of a restaurant's operation, from kitchen efficiency to customer flow patterns to staff training programs. The goal was to identify specific areas where improvements could drive both customer satisfaction and profitability. My first comprehensive consulting project was with Giuseppe Romano, the owner of Romano's Italian Bistro, the same restaurant where my father had delivered his devastating Christmas Eve verdict. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I approached Giuseppe's business challenges with purely professional motivations. His restaurant had been successful for decades, but he was struggling to adapt to changing customer expectations and increased competition from newer establishments. Giuseppe was in his early 70s and had been running the restaurant since he immigrated to Phoenix in the 1980s. He had built a loyal customer base through consistent quality and personal attention, but his systems and procedures hadn't evolved much since the restaurant opened. He was still managing inventory with handwritten notebooks, scheduling staff through phone calls and verbal agreements, and relying entirely on word-of-mouth marketing. The assessment I conducted revealed both significant strengths and critical vulnerabilities in Giuseppe's operation. His food quality was exceptional, his location was prime, and his regular customers were genuinely devoted to the restaurant. However, his profit margins were dangerously thin due to inefficient purchasing. His staff turnover was increasing because of inconsistent scheduling and training, and he was missing enormous opportunities to attract younger customers who relied on digital platforms to discover new restaurants. Working with Giuseppe taught me lessons that would prove invaluable in everything that followed. He was initially resistant to changing systems that had worked for decades, But he was also desperate enough to listen when I demonstrated how small improvements could generate significant financial returns. I helped him implement digital inventory management, standardize staff training procedures, and develop an online presence that showcased his restaurant's authentic atmosphere and exceptional food quality. The results were dramatic and immediate. Within 3 months, Giuseppe's food costs had decreased by 12%, while his customer satisfaction scores increased significantly. His staff became more engaged and productive because they finally had clear expectations and consistent schedules. Most importantly, his revenue increased by almost 30% as new customers discovered the restaurant through improved online visibility, and existing customers began visiting more frequently because of enhanced service quality. Giuseppe was so pleased with the transformation that he started referring other restaurant owners to my consulting services. Word spread quickly through Phoenix's tight-knit restaurant community, and I soon found myself working with establishments ranging from casual family restaurants to upscale fine dining venues. Each project taught me something new about the industry and expanded my understanding of what it took to create truly successful restaurant operations. As my consulting business grew, I began to encounter restaurant owners who were interested in selling their establishments but didn't know how to properly value their businesses or find qualified buyers. This presented another opportunity that aligned perfectly with my growing expertise and long-term goals. I started offering business valuation and acquisition consulting services, helping owners prepare their restaurants for sale, while simultaneously building relationships with potential investors and buyers. The transition from consultant to potential restaurant owner happened gradually, but it felt completely natural given the direction my career had been taking. I had developed relationships with suppliers, understood the operational challenges, knew the local market intimately, and had proven my ability to improve restaurant performance. The logical next step was to acquire my own establishment and implement everything I had learned on a larger scale. My business mentor, Elena Rodriguez, encouraged this evolution and offered to help me develop a formal business plan for restaurant acquisition and management. Elena had built her own consulting firm into a multi-million-dollar operation, and she understood the strategic thinking required to expand successfully from service provider to business owner. Together, we analyzed my financial position, identified potential acquisition targets, and developed criteria for evaluating restaurant investment opportunities. The financial analysis revealed that my digital marketing agency had generated enough profit and cash flow to support a significant restaurant acquisition, especially if I could secure favorable financing terms. More importantly, the consulting relationships I had built gave me unprecedented insight into which restaurants were likely to succeed with proper management, and which ones might be available for purchase at reasonable prices. Elena helped me understand that restaurant acquisition was fundamentally different from starting a restaurant from scratch. When you acquired an existing establishment, you inherited existing staff, customer relationships, supplier contracts, lease agreements, and operational systems. The key was identifying restaurants that had strong foundational elements, but were underperforming due to management issues that could be corrected with proper expertise and resources. This perspective led me to focus on established restaurants with good locations and loyal customer bases, but inexperienced or overwhelmed ownership. These situations offered the best opportunity to create immediate improvements in performance, while minimizing the risks associated with unproven concepts or problematic locations. I wasn't interested in fixing restaurants that had fundamental flaws in their concept or positioning. I wanted to find diamonds in the rough that could be polished to reveal their true potential. The search process took several months because I was determined to find exactly the right opportunity, rather than settling for the first available option. I evaluated restaurants based on location, lease terms, existing customer base, staff quality, equipment condition, and growth potential. I also considered less tangible factors, like the restaurant's reputation in the community and the personal motivations of the current owners. During this search process, I continued expanding my consulting business and deepening my industry knowledge. I attended restaurant industry conferences, joined professional associations, and built relationships with successful restaurant operators throughout Arizona and beyond. The more I learned about the industry, the more confident I became that restaurant ownership was the right next step for my career. My family's reactions to my expanding business activities were predictably mixed. My mother expressed cautious pride in my growing success, though she clearly didn't fully understand what I was doing or why restaurant consulting was different from my original digital marketing services. Marcus seemed genuinely impressed by the scope of my business operations, particularly when he learned about the revenue numbers and growth projections. My father's response was more complex and contradictory than I had expected. On one hand, he continued to dismiss my work as unimportant and temporary, predicting that I would eventually realize my mistake and seek more traditional employment. On the other hand, he seemed uncomfortable with the undeniable evidence of my financial success and professional recognition within the restaurant industry. The tension came to a head during a family dinner in March when my mother mentioned that she had heard from several people that I was becoming well known in the local restaurant scene. My father immediately became defensive, claiming that running a few social media accounts didn't make someone an expert on anything important. When I calmly explained the scope of my consulting work and the results I had achieved for my clients, he dismissed it as luck and suggested that I was taking credit for other people's hard work. This conversation was different from previous arguments because I no longer felt the need to defend myself or seek his approval. I had built a successful business, developed genuine expertise in a complex industry, and earned the respect of experienced professionals who valued my contributions. His opinion, while still hurtful on a personal level, had become irrelevant to my professional identity and self-worth. The emotional distance I had created from my father's judgment allowed me to focus entirely on my business goals, without the constant distraction of trying to prove myself to someone who was determined to remain unimpressed. This mental clarity proved invaluable as I entered the most challenging and rewarding phase of my career development. In April, I identified what appeared to be the perfect acquisition opportunity. A family-owned Italian restaurant called Bella Vista had been struggling for several years, despite having an excellent location, a solid reputation for food quality, and a devoted core customer base. The owners, Frank and Catherine Moretti, were both in their 60s and wanted to retire, but they were having difficulty finding a buyer who would maintain the restaurant's character and treat their long-term employees fairly. The Morettis had built Bella Vista over 25 years into exactly the kind of establishment I wanted to own. The restaurant served authentic Italian cuisine in a warm, welcoming atmosphere that attracted both families and couples looking for special dining experiences. The location was perfect, situated in a busy shopping district with excellent visibility and parking. The kitchen was well-equipped and efficiently designed, and the dining room had the kind of authentic charm that couldn't be created artificially. However, the restaurant's financial performance had been declining for 3 years, due to a combination of factors that I recognized as completely correctable with proper management. The Morettis were wonderful people and talented cooks, but they had never developed effective systems for inventory management, staff training, marketing, or financial planning. They were working 16-hour days but barely generating enough profit to cover their personal expenses and loan payments. My initial assessment revealed that Bella Vista had all the elements necessary for success but was simply being held back by operational inefficiencies and missed marketing opportunities. The food quality was exceptional, the staff was experienced and loyal, and the customer feedback was overwhelmingly positive. The problems were in areas where my consulting expertise could create immediate and dramatic improvements. The acquisition negotiations with the Morettis were emotionally challenging because they clearly loved their restaurant and were afraid of seeing it change under new ownership. They had received other offers from buyers who wanted to completely rebrand the restaurant or convert it to a different type of establishment. I spent hours with them, explaining my vision for preserving everything that made Bella Vista special while implementing the operational improvements that would ensure its long-term success. Elena Rodriguez accompanied me to several meetings with the Morettis and helped structure a deal that addressed their concerns while protecting my interests as the buyer. We developed an agreement that included a gradual transition period where the Morettis would remain involved as consultants, ensuring continuity for both staff and customers. The deal also included employment guarantees for existing staff and commitments to maintain the restaurant's menu and atmosphere. The financial terms of the acquisition required me to leverage almost everything I had built over the previous 3 years. I used the profits from my consulting business as a down payment, secured a business loan using my agency as collateral, and committed to reinvesting all of Bella Vista's profits back into the restaurant for the first 2 years. It was a significant risk, but it was also the logical culmination of everything I had been working towards since that devastating Christmas Eve dinner. Closing on the restaurant purchase in June felt like crossing a threshold into an entirely new phase of my life and career. I was no longer just a consultant who helped other people improve their businesses. I was a restaurant owner with full responsibility for every aspect of the operation, from food quality to staff management to financial performance. The weight of that responsibility was both terrifying and exhilarating. The first few months of ownership were an intensive learning experience that tested every skill I had developed over the previous 3 years. I worked alongside the kitchen staff to understand the food preparation processes, spent hours with servers to learn about customer preferences and service standards, and analyzed every aspect of the restaurant's financial performance to identify opportunities for improvement. The staff was initially skeptical of my intentions and capabilities, which was completely understandable given their experience with previous ownership changes in other restaurants. I addressed their concerns through transparent communication about my plans, guaranteed employment contracts that provided security they had never experienced, and immediate improvements in working conditions that demonstrated my commitment to their success. The transformation of Bella Vista became a showcase for everything I had learned about restaurant operations and management. I implemented digital inventory systems that reduced food waste by 20%, developed standardized training programs that improved service consistency, and created marketing campaigns that attracted new customers while maintaining the loyalty of existing patrons. Most importantly, I proved to myself that I could successfully transition from consultant to owner while maintaining the high standards and authentic character that made the restaurant special. The staff became enthusiastic supporters of my leadership. Customers noticed and appreciated the improvements, and the financial performance exceeded even my most optimistic projections. By September, just 3 months after taking ownership, Bella Vista was generating more profit than it had in any previous year under the Moretti's management. The restaurant was attracting attention from industry publications and food critics, and I was receiving inquiries from other restaurant owners who wanted to learn about my management approach. The success of Bella Vista validated every decision I had made since that Christmas Eve confrontation with my father. I had built a thriving business, earned the respect of industry professionals, and created value for employees, customers, and the broader community. Most importantly, I had proven to myself that my instincts and abilities were reliable guides for making major life and career decisions. The momentum I had built with Bella Vista's transformation created opportunities I hadn't anticipated when I first acquired the restaurant. Word spread quickly through Phoenix's restaurant community about the dramatic improvements in performance and atmosphere, and I started receiving calls from other restaurant owners who were facing similar challenges. Some wanted consulting services, others were interested in selling their establishments, and a few were looking for partnership opportunities that could benefit both parties. This unexpected attention forced me to think more strategically about my long-term goals in the restaurant industry. I could continue focusing exclusively on Bella Vista and building it into the best possible version of itself. Or I could leverage the success I had achieved to expand into additional restaurant ownership and management. The decision would determine not just my career trajectory, but also the scope of the impact I could have on the local dining scene. Elena Rodriguez and I spent several sessions analyzing the pros and cons of expansion versus specialization. She pointed out that many successful restaurant operators had built their reputations by perfecting a single concept before attempting to scale their operations. However, she also recognized that my consulting background gave me unique advantages for managing multiple establishments, since I already understood how to systematize operations and implement consistent standards across different locations. The factor that ultimately influenced my decision was the realization that Phoenix's restaurant market had significant gaps that I was uniquely positioned to fill. Through my consulting work and industry connections, I had identified several excellent locations where experienced restaurant operators could create successful establishments. But most potential investors lacked either the operational expertise or the financial resources to execute properly. This insight led me to develop what I called the Phoenix Restaurant Development Initiative, a comprehensive approach to identifying, acquiring, and transforming underperforming restaurants throughout the metropolitan area. The strategy combined my consulting expertise with strategic partnerships and financial innovation to create a sustainable model for restaurant development that could benefit owners, employees, customers, and investors. The first expansion opportunity came from an unexpected source. Giuseppe Romano, whose restaurant had been one of my early consulting success stories, approached me about acquiring a second location that had become available in a prime downtown area. The space had previously housed an upscale steakhouse that had failed despite heavy initial investment, leaving behind excellent kitchen equipment and an elegant dining room that needed only minor modifications. Giuseppe was interested in opening a second Romano's location, but lacked the capital and energy to manage the expansion himself. He proposed a partnership where I would handle the acquisition, renovation, and management, while he provided the recipes, training, and brand expertise that had made the original Romano's successful. It was an elegant solution that leveraged both of our strengths while minimizing the risks associated with starting a completely new concept. The Downtown Romano's project became a laboratory for testing systems and procedures that could be applied to future restaurant developments. I implemented comprehensive staff training programs, standardized operating procedures, and financial management systems that ensured consistency between the two locations, while allowing each restaurant to maintain its unique character and customer relationships. The success of the downtown expansion attracted attention from commercial real estate developers who were struggling to find qualified restaurant operators for their properties. Phoenix was experiencing rapid population growth, and new shopping centers and mixed-use developments were being built throughout the metropolitan area. Many of these projects included restaurant spaces, but developers were having difficulty attracting experienced operators who could create the kind of dining destinations that would drive traffic and enhance property values. This situation presented enormous opportunities for someone with my combination of operational expertise and financial capability. I started working directly with developers to identify restaurant concepts that would complement their projects, while also meeting my standards for operational excellence and financial performance. These relationships gave me access to prime locations with favorable lease terms, while providing developers with the assurance that their restaurant spaces would be occupied by successful, professionally managed establishments. The partnership approach I had pioneered with Giuseppe Romano became the foundation for a series of similar collaborations with other experienced restaurant operators who had great concepts but limited resources for expansion. I provided the capital, operational systems, and management expertise while they contributed their culinary skills, brand recognition, and customer relationships. These partnerships allowed me to diversify my restaurant portfolio while minimizing the risks associated with developing completely new concepts. By the spring of my second year as a restaurant owner, I was managing 5 establishments across Phoenix, each with its own character and customer base, but all operating according to the same high standards for food quality, service excellence, and financial performance. The portfolio included 2 Italian restaurants, a Mexican family dining establishment, an upscale American bistro, and a casual breakfast and lunch cafe that catered to the downtown business district. Managing multiple restaurants required a completely different set of skills than operating a single establishment. I had to develop systems for monitoring performance across all locations, ensure consistent training and standards, coordinate purchasing and inventory management, and maintain the personal relationships with staff and customers that were essential to each restaurant's success. The complexity was enormous, but the financial rewards and professional satisfaction made the challenges worthwhile. The growth of my restaurant operations also created new opportunities for my original consulting business. Restaurant owners throughout Arizona and neighboring states started seeking my advice on everything from acquisition strategies to operational improvements to expansion planning. I was able to command premium consulting fees because of my proven track record as both a consultant and an owner, and the revenue from consulting helped finance continued growth in my restaurant portfolio. However, the rapid expansion of my business operations also created tensions in my personal life that I hadn't fully anticipated. The demands of managing multiple restaurants left little time for relationships or leisure activities, and the constant pressure of ensuring consistent performance across all locations was emotionally and physically exhausting. I was working 70-hour weeks and rarely taking complete days off, which was sustainable in the short term but clearly unsustainable as a long-term lifestyle. The isolation was particularly challenging because restaurant ownership is fundamentally a people business that requires constant interaction with staff, customers, suppliers, and business partners. While these interactions were professionally rewarding, they didn't provide the kind of personal connections and emotional support that are necessary for psychological well-being. I was surrounded by people all day, but often felt completely alone. My relationship with David, my college boyfriend, had ended shortly after I acquired Bella Vista because he couldn't handle the demands of my schedule and the uncertainty of restaurant ownership. He had wanted a traditional relationship with predictable routines and shared leisure time, which was impossible given my commitment to building my restaurant business. The breakup was amicable but painful, and it forced me to confront the personal costs of my professional ambitions. My family relationships during this period were complicated and often frustrating. My mother was proud of my success but worried constantly about my health and work-life balance. She would call regularly to check on me, often expressing concern that I was working too hard and sacrificing too much for my career. While her worry came from a place of love, it sometimes felt like additional pressure to justify my choices and reassure her that I was happy. Marcus had become genuinely supportive of my business achievements, probably because my success made him feel better about his own unconventional career path. He started bringing friends to my restaurants and would proudly introduce me as his sister, who owned multiple establishments around the city. His support meant more to me than I had expected, and we developed a closer relationship than we had ever had during our childhood. My father's reaction to my expanding business empire was the most complex and emotionally charged aspect of my family relationships. He couldn't ignore the obvious evidence of my success, but he also couldn't bring himself to acknowledge that he had been wrong about my capabilities and potential. Instead, he oscillated between grudging respect for my financial achievements and dismissive comments about the restaurant industry being unsuitable for a woman. The contradiction in his attitude became most apparent when he would visit my restaurants as a customer while simultaneously criticizing my career choices during family gatherings. He clearly enjoyed the attention and service he received as the father of the owner, and he would often comment on the food quality and atmosphere in ways that indicated genuine appreciation. Yet he continued to suggest that restaurant ownership was too stressful and demanding for someone my age, particularly a woman who should be thinking about marriage and family. This disconnect between his behavior and his stated opinions revealed the depth of his struggle to reconcile his preconceptions about appropriate careers for women with the undeniable reality of my professional success. He wanted to enjoy the reflected status that came from having a successful daughter, but he couldn't fully accept that success because it contradicted everything he had believed about my limitations and proper role. The emotional impact of his continued criticism was diminishing, as my confidence in my own abilities and decisions grew stronger. The success of my restaurants provided objective validation that my instincts and strategies were sound, regardless of his opinions. However, the ongoing tension was still painful, because it represented a fundamental failure to connect with the person whose approval I had sought throughout my childhood. The breakthrough moment in our relationship came during a particularly busy Saturday evening at Bella Vista, when my father arrived for dinner with several of his longtime friends from the auto repair shop. I was working the floor that night, checking on tables and ensuring that everything was running smoothly, when I noticed him pointing me out to his companions and explaining that I was the owner. The pride in his voice when he introduced me to his friends was unmistakable, even though he had never expressed that pride directly to me. His friends were clearly impressed by the restaurant's atmosphere and service quality, and they spent several minutes asking him questions about my background and how I had gotten into the restaurant business. For the first time, I heard him describe my achievements in positive terms, even if he was doing so to impress his friends rather than to acknowledge my success directly. This incident made me realize that my father's inability to express pride or approval directly didn't necessarily mean that he didn't feel those emotions. His criticism and dismissiveness might have been defense mechanisms for dealing with his own insecurities about having a daughter who had achieved more professional success than he had ever imagined possible. Understanding this dynamic didn't excuse his behavior, but it did help me develop a more nuanced perspective on our relationship. The insight also reinforced my determination to continue building my business according to my own vision and values, regardless of external validation or criticism. The satisfaction I derived from creating successful restaurants, developing talented staff, and serving excellent food to appreciative customers was more meaningful than any approval I might receive from family members or other external sources. This mindset became crucial as I entered the most ambitious phase of my restaurant development career. I had proven that I could successfully acquire and operate individual establishments, and I had demonstrated the ability to manage multiple locations simultaneously. The next challenge was to identify and execute a signature project that would establish my reputation as one of Phoenix's premier restaurant operators. The opportunity I had been waiting for presented itself in an unexpected way through my relationship with the downtown business community. I had become involved with the Phoenix Restaurant Association and the Downtown Development Authority, partly for networking purposes but also because I believed in contributing to the broader success of the local dining scene. Through these organizations, I learned about development plans for a major mixed-use project that would include residential units, office space, and several restaurant locations. The project was being developed by Morrison Properties, one of Phoenix's most respected commercial real estate companies, and they were seeking experienced restaurant operators who could create dining destinations that would enhance the entire development. The restaurant spaces were larger and more expensive than anything I had previously considered, but they also offered the opportunity to create something truly special that would establish my reputation at a completely different level. The flagship restaurant space in the Morrison development was particularly intriguing because it included both indoor and outdoor dining areas, a full bar, and enough square footage to accommodate a diverse menu and sophisticated service style. The location was perfect, situated at the corner of two major streets with excellent visibility and convenient access to both residential and business districts. However, competing for this space would require me to demonstrate not just financial capability, but also a clear vision for the type of restaurant that would succeed in such a prominent location. I would be competing against established restaurant groups with deeper pockets and longer track records, so I needed to develop a proposal that highlighted my unique strengths and competitive advantages. The proposal I developed drew on everything I had learned from my consulting work and restaurant operations to create a concept that would appeal to multiple customer segments while maintaining the high standards that had become my trademark. The restaurant would feature contemporary American cuisine with Mediterranean influences, an extensive wine list, and a service style that could accommodate both casual family dining and special occasion celebrations. More importantly, the proposal included detailed operational plans that demonstrated my understanding of the complexities involved in managing a large-scale restaurant operation. I provided comprehensive financial projections, staffing plans, marketing strategies, and quality control systems that showed how I would ensure consistent excellence across all aspects of the operation. The presentation to Morrison Properties was the most important business meeting of my career up to that point. I was competing against 3 other restaurant groups, all of which had more experience with large-scale operations and stronger financial backing. My advantage was my track record of transforming underperforming restaurants and my reputation for operational excellence. But I needed to convince the developers that these qualifications would translate to success in a much larger and more complex environment. The meeting lasted almost 3 hours, and covered every aspect of my proposal in exhaustive detail. The Morrison Properties team asked probing questions about my financial projections, operational systems, staffing plans, and marketing strategies. They were particularly interested in how I would maintain the personal attention and quality control that had made my smaller restaurants successful while scaling up to serve a much larger customer base. The most challenging part of the presentation was explaining how my restaurant would complement the overall development, while also standing out as a destination in its own right. The developers needed assurance that I could create an establishment that would attract customers from throughout the metropolitan area, not just from the immediate neighborhood. They wanted a restaurant that would enhance the prestige and property values of the entire development. I addressed these concerns by emphasizing my proven ability to build strong customer relationships and my understanding of Phoenix's diverse dining preferences. I explained how my marketing background would help me reach different customer segments and how my operational systems would ensure consistent quality regardless of volume fluctuations. Most importantly, I demonstrated my commitment to creating not just a successful restaurant, but a true dining destination that would become an integral part of Phoenix's culinary landscape. The decision process took 2 weeks, during which I alternated between confidence in my proposal and anxiety about the competition. Landing this restaurant space would represent a quantum leap in the scale and visibility of my operations, but losing it would mean waiting months or years for another comparable opportunity. The stakes felt enormous, not just financially but also in terms of my professional reputation and future growth potential. When Morrison Properties called to inform me that I had been selected for the flagship restaurant space, I felt a mixture of elation and terror that I had never experienced before. This was the opportunity I had been working toward for 3 years, but it was also the biggest risk I had ever taken. The financial commitment was substantial, the operational challenges were unprecedented in my experience, and the visibility meant that any failures would be very public and potentially damaging to my entire restaurant portfolio. However, the excitement and sense of possibility outweighed the fears and uncertainties. This restaurant would be my chance to create something truly exceptional that would establish my reputation as one of Phoenix's leading restaurant operators. It would also provide a platform for implementing innovative operational concepts and training programs that could be applied to future restaurant developments. The planning and development phase for the Morrison restaurant became an intensive learning experience that pushed every aspect of my business skills to new levels. I worked with architects and designers to create a space that would be both beautiful and functional, developed relationships with new suppliers who could handle the increased volume requirements, and began recruiting and training a management team capable of overseeing the complex daily operations. Most importantly, I started preparing mentally and emotionally for the transition from small-scale restaurant owner to major player in Phoenix's competitive dining scene. The success or failure of this restaurant would determine not just my financial future, but also my credibility and reputation within the industry I had grown to love. The development of Morrison's flagship restaurant consumed every aspect of my life for the following 8 months. What I had initially envisioned as a straightforward expansion of my existing operations quickly evolved into something far more complex and demanding than anything I had previously undertaken. Every decision, from the layout of the kitchen to the selection of wine glasses, required careful consideration of how it would impact both immediate functionality and long-term operational efficiency. Working with the architectural team challenged me to think about restaurant design in completely new ways. My previous establishments had been acquired with existing layouts that I modified incrementally, but this project required me to create an entirely new space from the ground up. The architects Rebecca Chen and David Kim from Horizon Design Group pushed me to articulate not just what I wanted the restaurant to look like, but how I wanted customers to feel when they entered the space. The collaborative process with Rebecca and David became unexpectedly educational and inspiring. They helped me understand how lighting, acoustics, traffic flow, and sightlines could be manipulated to create specific emotional responses and behavioral patterns among customers. We spent countless hours discussing how the entrance sequence would establish expectations, how the bar area could function as both a destination and a transition space, and how the dining room layout could accommodate everything from intimate conversations to business meetings to celebration dinners. The kitchen design proved to be even more complex than the dining room layout. I needed to create a workspace that could handle significantly higher volume than my other restaurants, while maintaining the quality standards that had become my trademark. This required extensive consultation with equipment specialists, efficiency experts, and experienced executive chefs who understood the operational demands of high-volume restaurant service. Chef Antonio Valdez, whom I recruited from one of Phoenix's most respected fine dining establishments, became instrumental in developing both the kitchen layout and the menu concept. Antonio brought 15 years of experience in upscale restaurant kitchens, including 3 years as sous chef at a James Beard award-winning restaurant in San Francisco. His expertise helped me understand the technical requirements for creating consistent, high-quality food production at a scale I had never previously attempted. The menu development process with Antonio revealed just how much I still needed to learn about advanced restaurant operations. My previous establishments had succeeded with relatively simple menus and straightforward preparation techniques, but this restaurant required more sophisticated cuisine that could justify higher price points while still appealing to diverse customer preferences. We spent weeks testing recipes, analyzing food costs, and refining preparation procedures to ensure that every dish could be executed consistently during busy service periods. The staffing challenges for the new restaurant were unlike anything I had encountered in my smaller establishments. I needed to recruit and train servers who could provide sophisticated service for an upscale clientele, bartenders who could create craft cocktails and provide wine expertise, and kitchen staff who could execute Antonio's refined menu under pressure. Most importantly, I needed to develop management systems that could maintain quality control and operational efficiency across all these different service elements simultaneously. The recruitment process took 4 months and involved interviewing hundreds of candidates for positions ranging from servers to sommelier to kitchen managers. I discovered that finding people with the right combination of technical skills, professional attitude, and cultural fit was extraordinarily difficult, especially given the competitive job market for experienced restaurant professionals in Phoenix. Many of the best candidates were already employed at established restaurants where they had developed loyalty to their current employers. I eventually decided to recruit some staff from outside Phoenix, offering relocation assistance and competitive compensation packages to attract experienced professionals from restaurant markets in California, New York, and Chicago. This strategy allowed me to bring in people with high-end restaurant experience who were excited about the opportunity to help establish a new destination restaurant in a growing market like Phoenix. The training program I developed for the new restaurant became the most comprehensive and intensive I had ever created. We conducted 3 weeks of full-time training before the restaurant opened, covering everything from food knowledge, to wine service, to customer interaction protocols. I wanted every staff member to understand not just their specific job responsibilities, but also how their role contributed to the overall customer experience and operational success of the restaurant. During the training period, I discovered that my own knowledge and skills needed significant upgrading to match the sophistication of the operation I was creating. I enrolled in wine education courses, studied advanced restaurant management techniques, and spent time observing operations at highly regarded restaurants in other cities. The learning curve was steep, but it was also exhilarating to discover how much depth and complexity existed in areas of restaurant operation that I had previously understood only superficially. The financial investment required for the Morrison restaurant far exceeded my original projections, despite careful planning and conservative estimates. The construction costs, equipment purchases, initial inventory, pre-opening marketing, and staff training expenses created a cash flow challenge that required me to leverage everything I had built over the previous 3 years. I had to secure additional financing using my other restaurants as collateral, which meant that the success or failure of this single project would determine the fate of my entire business empire. Elena Rodriguez provided crucial support during this financially stressful period, helping me negotiate favorable loan terms and develop contingency plans for various scenarios. She also connected me with other restaurant operators who had successfully managed similar expansions, providing valuable insights about cash flow management, operational scaling, and risk mitigation strategies. These conversations reassured me that the challenges I was facing were normal parts of ambitious restaurant development, not signs that I was in over my head. The marketing strategy for the new restaurant required a completely different approach than anything I had used for my smaller establishments. This restaurant needed to attract attention from food critics, generate buzz among Phoenix's dining enthusiasts, and establish itself as a destination for special occasions and business entertaining. I couldn't rely on word-of-mouth marketing and neighborhood customers. I needed to create awareness and excitement throughout the metropolitan area. I hired Jessica Torres, a restaurant marketing specialist with experience launching upscale establishments in competitive markets. Jessica brought expertise in public relations, social media strategy, and event marketing that complemented my existing marketing skills while extending my reach into channels I had never effectively utilized. Together, we developed a comprehensive launch strategy that included media previews, influencer events, and strategic partnerships with local businesses and organizations. The soft opening period provided the final test of all the systems and procedures we had developed over the previous 8 months. For 2 weeks, we served limited menus to invited guests, staff, friends, and families, and selected customers from my other restaurants. This allowed us to identify operational issues and refine service procedures before the official opening and public review period. The soft opening revealed both strengths and weaknesses in our preparation. The food quality was consistently excellent, the service staff performed professionally, and the atmosphere created the sophisticated dining experience I had envisioned. However, we discovered timing issues in the kitchen, coordination problems between different service stations, and technology glitches that needed immediate attention before we could handle the volume and expectations of regular service. The most stressful aspect of the soft opening was realizing that I had created something beyond my direct control for the first time in my restaurant career. My smaller establishments had allowed me to monitor every detail personally and intervene immediately when problems arose. This restaurant was too large and complex for hands-on micromanagement, which meant I had to trust the systems and people I had put in place to maintain standards without constant supervision. Learning to delegate responsibility while maintaining accountability became a crucial skill development challenge during this period. I had to resist the urge to handle every problem personally and instead focus on coaching my management team to make good decisions independently. This transition from direct operator to strategic overseer was emotionally difficult but operationally necessary for the restaurant's long-term success. The official opening in October attracted more attention than I had anticipated, both positive and challenging. The local food critics attended within the first 2 weeks, and their reviews would significantly influence public perception and long-term success. The dining room was fully booked for the first month, which created enormous pressure to deliver exceptional experiences consistently, while still refining operational procedures. The early reviews were overwhelmingly positive, praising both the food quality and the sophisticated atmosphere I had worked so hard to create. The Arizona Republic's food critic described the restaurant as, quote, a significant addition to Phoenix's upscale dining scene, while Phoenix Magazine included it in their list of must-try new restaurants. Most importantly, customers were returning for second and third visits, indicating that we were successfully creating the kind of memorable experiences that build long-term loyalty. However, success brought its own challenges that I hadn't fully anticipated. The restaurant's popularity created scheduling pressures that tested our operational systems and staff capabilities. We were serving more customers per night than projected, which strained kitchen capacity and required additional staff hiring during our busiest periods. The high expectations created by positive reviews also meant that any service failures or inconsistencies were more likely to generate complaints and negative feedback. Managing these success-related challenges while simultaneously overseeing my other restaurant operations required time management and prioritization skills I was still developing. I found myself working even longer hours than during the development phase, splitting time between hands-on management at the new restaurant and maintenance of standards at my existing establishments. The physical and emotional demands were unsustainable, and I realized I needed to develop better systems for managing multiple high-performing restaurants simultaneously. The solution came through the development of what I called my executive management program, which involved promoting experienced staff members from my existing restaurants to supervisory roles at the new establishment, while bringing in additional managers to handle day-to-day operations at all locations. This approach allowed me to maintain close involvement with strategic decisions while delegating routine operational responsibilities to people I trusted. The financial performance of the Morrison restaurant exceeded even my most optimistic projections. Within 3 months of opening, we were generating revenue levels that justified the substantial investment and positioned the restaurant among Phoenix's most successful upscale establishments. More importantly, the profit margins were strong enough to support continued growth and expansion, while providing financial security for my entire restaurant portfolio. The success of this flagship restaurant also elevated my reputation within Phoenix's business community in ways I hadn't expected. I started receiving invitations to industry events, requests for speaking engagements, and inquiries about consulting opportunities from restaurant operators in other cities. The visibility and credibility that came with operating a successful upscale restaurant opened doors to business relationships and growth opportunities that had been unavailable when I was managing only smaller establishments. During this period of rapid professional growth, my family relationships underwent significant changes that reflected the evolving dynamics created by my obvious success. My mother became genuinely proud of my achievements and started bringing her friends to the new restaurant to show off what her daughter had accomplished. Marcus began working part-time at one of my restaurants, discovering that he actually enjoyed the hospitality industry and had natural abilities for customer service and staff management. My father's response to the success of the Morrison restaurant was the most complex and emotionally charged of all my family relationships. He couldn't ignore the evidence of my achievement, especially when the restaurant received positive coverage in local media, and became a recognized destination within Phoenix's dining scene. However, he also seemed uncomfortable with the level of success I had achieved and continued to express concerns about the sustainability and appropriateness of my career choices. The culmination of this family tension occurred in November when my parents made a reservation for dinner at the Morrison restaurant. This was the first time my father had voluntarily chosen to visit one of my establishments as a paying customer, rather than accepting a complimentary meal at one of my smaller restaurants. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, and I spent considerable time preparing for what I knew would be an emotionally significant evening. When my parents arrived for their reservation, I greeted them personally and ensured they received exceptional service throughout the evening. I wanted them to experience the restaurant as regular customers would, without any special treatment that might diminish the authenticity of their impressions. However, I also monitored their experience carefully to ensure that everything met the high standards I had established for all customers. Watching my father experience the restaurant I had created was both satisfying and emotionally complex. He was clearly impressed by the atmosphere, food quality, and service levels, but he seemed reluctant to acknowledge these positive impressions directly. Instead, he made comments about the prices, questioned whether the restaurant would remain popular once the novelty wore off, and suggested that the upscale dining market in Phoenix might not be large enough to support long-term success. Despite his verbal reservations, his behavior throughout the evening indicated genuine appreciation for what I had accomplished. He treated the staff with respect, complimented the food quality, and seemed to enjoy the attention he received as the owner's father. Most tellingly, he made another reservation before leaving, suggesting that his criticisms didn't reflect his actual opinion of the restaurant or its prospects for success. This dinner represented a turning point in my relationship with my father, even though the change was subtle and unspoken. While he never explicitly acknowledged that he had been wrong about my capabilities or potential, his willingness to patronize my restaurant as a customer indicated a level of respect that he had never previously expressed. It wasn't the apology or validation I had once craved, but it was a form of recognition that felt meaningful given our history. More importantly, I realized that my need for his approval had diminished significantly over the previous year. The success of my restaurants had provided objective validation of my business skills and professional judgment, making external approval less emotionally necessary. I still valued family relationships and wanted them to be proud of my achievements, but my self-worth was no longer dependent on their recognition or acceptance. The opportunity to acquire Romano's Italian Bistro presented itself in January, exactly 2 years after my father's devastating Christmas Eve declaration. Giuseppe Romano approached me privately during one of our quarterly business meetings, explaining that he was ready to retire and wanted to ensure his beloved restaurant would be preserved under ownership that understood its history and values. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. This was the same restaurant where my father had delivered his crushing judgment, the place where he had been a regular customer for over 20 years, the establishment that held decades of our family's memories. Giuseppe's proposal was both a business opportunity and a chance to complete a circle that had begun with my father's harsh words in this very location. The restaurant was profitable and well-regarded, with a loyal customer base that included many of Phoenix's most influential business and community leaders. More importantly, Romano's represented everything I had learned to value about authentic hospitality and genuine customer relationships during my journey through the restaurant industry. The negotiation process with Giuseppe was emotionally complex, because he wasn't just selling a business. He was entrusting me with his life's work and the legacy he had built over 4 decades in Phoenix. We spent hours discussing not just financial terms but also my vision for maintaining the restaurant's character, while implementing the operational improvements that would ensure its continued success. Giuseppe needed assurance that Romano's would remain true to its roots, while adapting to evolving customer expectations and market conditions. The acquisition required me to restructure my entire restaurant portfolio and make the largest financial commitment of my career. Romano's was more expensive than any of my previous purchases, but it was also the most strategically valuable addition to my growing restaurant empire. The location was perfect, the brand recognition was exceptional, and the operational systems were solid enough to support immediate profitability while offering opportunities for enhancement. Elena Rodriguez and I developed a comprehensive financing strategy that leveraged the success of my other restaurants while minimizing the risk to my overall business operations. The deal structure included a gradual transition period where Giuseppe would remain involved as a consultant, ensuring continuity for both staff and customers while I implemented my management systems and operational improvements. Closing on Romano's in March felt like the culmination of everything I had worked toward since that devastating Christmas Eve dinner. I was now the owner of the restaurant where my father had declared me his greatest disappointment, the place where he had dismissed my business achievements and questioned my potential for success. The transformation from humiliated daughter to restaurant owner in the same establishment where I had experienced my lowest moment felt like the ultimate validation of my journey. However, my motivation for acquiring Romano's extended far beyond personal vindication. The restaurant represented an opportunity to preserve an important part of Phoenix's dining heritage while demonstrating my commitment to authentic hospitality and community engagement. Giuseppe had built something genuinely special over the decades, and I wanted to honor that legacy while ensuring the restaurant's continued relevance and success. The transition period at Romano's provided valuable insights into the emotional and psychological aspects of restaurant ownership that I had never fully considered. Giuseppe's retirement was difficult for him, despite his excitement about my plans for the restaurant. He struggled with letting go of daily operational control while also wanting to ensure that his standards and values would be maintained under new ownership. Working closely with Giuseppe during this transition taught me important lessons about leadership, tradition, and change management that applied to all aspects of my business operations. I learned how to respect established systems and relationships while implementing improvements that enhanced performance without disrupting the essential character that made each restaurant special. The staff at Romano's was initially apprehensive about the ownership change, despite Giuseppe's enthusiastic endorsement of my capabilities and intentions. Many of them had worked at the restaurant for years and were concerned about potential changes to their employment security, working conditions, and the family-like atmosphere that Giuseppe had cultivated. I addressed these concerns through transparent communication, guaranteed employment contracts, and immediate improvements in wages and benefits that demonstrated my commitment to their success. The customer response to my acquisition of Romano's was overwhelmingly positive, particularly among the regular patrons, who had been concerned about the restaurant's future when Giuseppe announced his retirement plans. Many of these customers were familiar with my reputation from my other restaurants and my involvement in Phoenix's restaurant community. They appreciated my commitment to preserving Romano's authentic character while bringing modern management techniques and fresh energy to the operation. The operational improvements I implemented at Romano's were subtle but significant, focusing on enhancing efficiency and consistency without altering the fundamental dining experience that customers valued. I upgraded the point-of-sale system, streamlined inventory management, standardized staff training procedures, and expanded the wine list to include more diverse selections that complemented Giuseppe's traditional menu. Most importantly, I maintained the personal touch and community engagement that had always been central to Romano's identity. Giuseppe had built relationships with customers that spanned decades, and I was determined to honor those relationships while also creating new connections with younger diners and families who were discovering the restaurant for the first time. The financial performance of Romano's under my ownership exceeded Giuseppe's projections and validated my decision to make such a substantial investment. Within 6 months, revenue had increased by 25% through improved operational efficiency, expanded marketing reach, and enhanced customer experience initiatives. The profit margins improved even more dramatically as I implemented cost control measures and supply chain optimizations that Giuseppe had never had the expertise or inclination to pursue. The success at Romano's also provided the perfect platform for implementing my ultimate plan regarding my father's relationship with the restaurant. For over 20 years, he had been one of Romano's most regular customers, visiting at least twice a month and often bringing business associates or family members for special occasions. The restaurant held significant emotional and social value for him beyond just the food quality and service. I spent several weeks planning exactly how to handle my father's first visit after I became the owner. I wanted the experience to be memorable and impactful, while also maintaining the professionalism and dignity that I had worked so hard to establish throughout my career. This wasn't about petty revenge or public humiliation. It was about setting clear boundaries and demonstrating the consequences of his treatment of me over the years. When my father arrived for his usual Friday evening dinner in late May, I greeted him personally at the host stand. His surprise at seeing me was evident, but he quickly composed himself and asked to be seated at his regular table. Instead of accommodating his request, I handed him a formal letter that I had prepared with legal consultation to ensure it was appropriate and enforceable. The letter explained that while I had tremendous respect for Romano's history and traditions, I had made the decision to update the restaurant's customer policies to ensure a welcoming environment for all patrons. Effective immediately, individuals who had demonstrated patterns of disrespectful or inappropriate behavior toward staff or management were no longer welcome at the establishment. The letter specifically referenced our Christmas Eve conversation and his subsequent dismissive comments about my business achievements as examples of the kind of behavior that was inconsistent with Romano's values. My father's reaction was a mixture of shock, anger, and confusion. He attempted to argue that his comments had been private family discussions that had nothing to do with his status as a restaurant customer. I calmly explained that as the owner, I had the right to determine which customers were welcome, and that I had decided his presence would not contribute positively to the atmosphere I was working to maintain. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes, but it represented a definitive end to the power dynamic that had characterized our relationship for my entire life. For the first time, I was in a position of authority over him, and I was using that authority to enforce consequences for his treatment of me. The role reversal was complete and unmistakable. Giuseppe, who witnessed the interaction from across the dining room, approached me afterward to express his support for my decision. He explained that he had always been uncomfortable with my father's condescending attitude toward staff and his tendency to make demanding requests without consideration for their workload or schedule. Giuseppe had tolerated the behavior because of my father's status as a long-term customer, but he respected my decision to prioritize staff morale and restaurant atmosphere over individual customer relationships. The ban became public knowledge within Phoenix's restaurant community relatively quickly, partly because my father told his version of the story to anyone who would listen, and partly because several other restaurant owners quietly expressed admiration for my willingness to prioritize principles over profit. The incident enhanced my reputation as an operator who valued staff dignity and workplace respect, which helped me attract and retain high-quality employees across all my restaurants. My family's reaction to the Romano's incident was predictably complex and emotionally charged. My mother was distressed by the public nature of the conflict and worried about the long-term impact on family relationships. Marcus initially tried to play peacemaker, suggesting that I might reconsider the ban as a gesture of family unity, but he eventually came to understand and support my position after I explained the years of dismissive treatment that had led to this decision. My father's response evolved over several months, from anger to grudging acceptance to what might have been respect, though he never expressed the latter directly. He stopped criticizing my business achievements in family conversations and began referring to my restaurants in neutral or even slightly positive terms when the subject arose. More significantly, he seemed to finally understand that I had built something substantial and successful that commanded respect within Phoenix's business community. The success of my restaurant empire continued to expand throughout the following year, with new opportunities arising from my enhanced reputation and proven track record. I acquired 2 additional establishments, developed partnerships with several other operators, and began exploring opportunities in neighboring cities where my management expertise and financial resources could support similar growth. Looking back on the journey from that devastating Christmas Eve dinner to becoming one of Phoenix's most successful restaurant operators, I realized that my father's harsh judgment had actually been a gift, though certainly not one he intended to give. His declaration that I was his greatest disappointment had forced me to stop seeking his approval and start building the kind of success that spoke for itself. The ban from Romano's wasn't really about revenge or punishment. It was about establishing boundaries and demonstrating that actions have consequences, even within family relationships. More importantly, it was about creating the kind of workplace environment where people are treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their position or status. Today, I operate 7 successful restaurants across Phoenix, employ over 200 people, and have built a reputation for operational excellence and authentic hospitality that extends throughout the Southwest. My father may never acknowledge that he was wrong about my potential, but his opinion is no longer relevant to my sense of worth or my business decisions. Sometimes the greatest success comes not from gaining the approval we think we need, but from discovering we never needed it in the first place. The little girl who desperately wanted her father's validation grew into a woman who created her own definition of success and never looked back. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.